America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Friday to talk to you about the news of the day. Now, today I'm coming to you on Wednesday mid-morning because I have some ideas, that I've been working on for a while and research interests regarding left family policies and why the left is so bad about talking about the nuclear family and supporting the nuclear family, because the left should support the nuclear family. And make no mistake, if you don't have a robust family policy, just know that the right does. Right? And so if you don't have something to say about church, just know that the right does. So, these meaningful institutions matter. You need to have policies that actually uphold your political vision. You need social policies that uphold your political vision. You should have something to say about what goes on in schools. You should have something to say about what goes on in families. You should have something to say about what goes on in churches, right? And it should uphold a progressive vision. For example, some people say like, oh, you can't talk about the family. How dare you say things about the family? Yes, I can. I can talk about the family as an institution of freedom. And how is the family an institution of freedom? Well, if you don't know, families are institutions where you're not exactly other than the other person. There's a way in which you are who you are, and they are who they are. But there's also a way in which you're joint. The one flesh bit isn't just isn't necessarily merely a metaphor. It's also a state. So I like it's good that a married couple can just breeze into a bank and get a joint bank account, right? You aren't other than other people. Now, this sphere of immediate relation needs to be circumscribed, because there are other forms of freedom where you are other than other people. For example, if my spouse steals a car, I shouldn't have to go to jail, right? So there are immediate relations. There's a kind of freedom, there are kind of plans, and there's a kind of way of being you can only do if someone else isn't really other than you, but is with you, and then with you in a way that's not really up to either of your choice. Because, that's what separates, shacking up and putting a ring on it, right? It's not up to your choice anymore. It's kind of a process to get disentangled. So there are certain kinds of plans you can only make with someone who is in it with you. And then there are certain kinds of plans you can only make with someone who's kind of in it with you, right? So if you confuse the two, you end up confusing a lot of things that get really expensive really quickly, right? So insofar as the Constitution upholds all of the blessings of liberty, it should uphold all of the kinds of freedom, which includes, property ownership, the ability to participate in government as an equal, civic freedom where I can go out and, work in the job market, and family freedom where I can participate in co-determining my household with my spouse as an equal, right? And these are all different kinds of freedom, and there's a way in which family planning shouldn't be any more a matter of wealth than voting, right? And so until we understand that family, that having your family be determined by wealth is as dicey as whether you can marry or whether you can't, or even how many kids you can have. There's a way in which that's the equivalent of having a poll tax, right? Well, you can only vote if you can pay for voting. You can only have a family if you can pay for family. Well, we got to raise the wages for the poll workers somehow, so we have to charge the voters. Well, no, this is why you collect taxes and so supply everyone as a matter of right, every citizen as a matter of right, the ability to vote. Which is also why you should supply every person, every potential family person, as a matter of right, a way to participate in family, right? Because that shouldn't be a luxury good. Families shouldn't be a luxury good. So why should families be nuclear? I get people have really intense reactions, especially some people who haven't actually thought about the issue about why nuclear families are actually good. Well, historically we've been from, well, you know what? Historically we haven't been democratic either, right? So you have to justify institutions, not necessarily based on prior institutions, but on what the revelations of right and kind of working through what freedom demands. or we'd still have kings and stuff because that's historically how it worked, right? So why should families be nuclear? How is this a progression in freedom? Well, the nuclear family is an emancipation from clan governance. It's emancipation from extended relatives. Like if you go around enough white families, you'll see that, I know some 60-year-old white people who are still run by their 80-year-old parents. Because maybe the 80-year-old parent is where the inheritance is or where the money is, or they've taken that honor their father or mother a little bit too seriously from the Bible. Anyway, extended family shouldn't have a disproportionate say over the running of your household, right? But if your only insurance policy is going to Papa and your only other child care is Mima, then what you have is functionally the Thanksgiving dinner that never ends. Like the Thanksgiving dinner dynamic for 10 years, right? So the hierarchy, you don't want families to be run by external hierarchy. And this is why actually Hegel and a few other people like laud the nuclear family as a progressive institution, because the alternative to that was like you just being run by the clan boss, like the uncle in charge. or the aunt in charge who inspected your house, right? So you don't want your family to have to suck up to your aunt and uncle in order to be the kind of family that you are, right? You want that to be between you and your spouse. Your family life should be governed by you and your spouse, not you and, your in-laws, right? So how is this bad? Well, so that's the argument for the nuclear family, right? It's an emancipation from clan governance. It's an emancipation from standing conventions about how households should be organized. Instead, households should be organized the way the people in the household want to organize it. And that's a quality of freedom that can't be, that is non-negligible, but can't happen with the understanding that all support systems are going to come through the extended family, right? I had a friend who had her dad kind of help her out to get, money for a divorce, right? All right, so, married kind of a lemon and wanted to get a divorce, and dad came up with the money for the divorce lawyer. But that's kind of one of those things that what happens when the dad says, no, right? So what happens when the dad doesn't pony up with the divorce cash? So there's a way in which, depending on extended family for your household livelihood, is actually a quality of unfreedom. So we need to talk about free families. We need to talk about the conditions of free families and why the state should uphold them. So why are extended families good? Why are nuclear families bad? Well, there's a lot of work and responsibility. There's more work and responsibility than two people can handle, both the material and cultural development of the household, especially once you add kids involved. There's simply more work and responsibility than two people ought to shoulder, and still sustain all of their other qualities of freedom, right? So just keep that in mind. So what happens is that the extended family in the conventional kind of setup in the non-nuclear family kind of takes up the slack. Takes up all the extra childcare, takes up all of the risk mitigation. Like I said, you hit up Meemaw for childcare and Pawpaw for emergency cash when the car breaks down. But instead, that should all be, but that comes with ties, right? That comes with directions and a greater family hierarchy that it shouldn't. Right, so you need to be able to sustain your own car and find a way to have disinterested childcare, or interested in your children, but not tied to your in-laws, right? All right, so in France they have programs where they'll send people to your house. They subsidize nannies, so you get 8 hours of housework done a week that's subsidized by the state. right? They'll send someone to your home to help just with housework, right? And they have 35-hour work weeks and more vacation. So there are ways in which we understand that and it turns out 80% of the women also work, whereas in the United States it's 60%. So, and like 60% of, but like in terms of black families, and I know that my audience is disproportionately black, it's much higher than 60%, I strongly suspect, because black women have always worked. This idea of like, should I go to work or should I stay home? That's white families. Black women have always worked, right? So the drawback of the nuclear family is all of the extra work and all of the responsibility that is heaped upon these two slim shoulders that have decided to run their own household. And, even if you're materially effective for your kid, you have money, you might not have the cultural understanding. A lot of people found out in this pandemic that they just don't have the disposition to homeschool. Turns out my kids thrived, but a lot of you guys found out that maybe you don't have the disposition to homeschool, which is fine. Not everyone can do all of the things. But you also might not have the money to pay for a tutor, right? So in terms of material and cultural development of the household, if you want that to be free and not coerced, and you don't want to have to hit up like Mima or Papa or get like a exploitative loan for a tutor for your kid, then you need a public infrastructure. And this is what the left could talk about, like what kind of public infrastructure do we need for a family that works? For a family that's adequate. To like the freedom that the people in the household. So it's not me telling you how to run your family. It's me, the left isn't trying to tell you how to run your family necessarily. It's giving you the enabling conditions for you to decide on your own how to run your family. But if you don't have reserve inheritance or the reserve supply of labor for childcare, like you can't run your family. It's run by, the extended families who actually handle your childcare and serve as your down payment. And these white families will lie to you about where the household down payments come from. Like they will lie about, like you got white families buying entire houses for their grandkids and telling their grandkids that they earned it, raising little Republican grandkids. So that's, you have to understand that in a well-ordered society, that's not necessary. You shouldn't have to come from money, or you shouldn't have to depend upon extended family to be able to actually organize your family the way you see fit. Right? So that's like a state responsibility. We tax Bezos and subsidize domestic workers, domestic childcare. Look, if we subsidize domestic childcare for and Angela Davis wrote a really good chapter on this. It's chapter 13 of Women, Race, and Class, on the approaching obsolescence of housework. If we subsidize domestic workers for 8, 10 hours a week of just like domestic work for the household, and we largely subsidize that, you'd see a knock in the divorce rate like rather quickly. Also, if we had a federal job guarantee, so that people didn't have to do awful things to keep their job, to be the provider, that we would see a knock in the divorce rate, right? So as you need social programs that mutually reinforce each other and also like enable the particular quality of freedom, right? So if we want families to actually thrive, we need to secure them resources, both labor and material, right? So, and I think this child income, the child tax credit, CTC, is actually a step in the right direction, because the idea that we want to emancipate family planning from wealth. You want to be able to, you shouldn't struggle more for having kids. If you're already struggling, it shouldn't be more of a struggling for having a kid, because that's like, if you're already struggling, it shouldn't be a struggle more for wanting to vote, right? And that becomes political oppression, laundered through like economics, right? So we don't have poll taxes, and we shouldn't punish people for having kids. So what? So yeah, nuclear families are good because they emancipate you from clan governance, the governance of extended families, or the uncle or the grandma who like uses the money or the inheritance or the extra child care over you. And we need to support the nuclear families we need to support nuclear families with state intervention, so it's disinterested from the authority of conventions and extended families, right? So without that, what we've done as the settler colonial model is we've gendered just this division of labor and risk so that the white people have. And it's very sly, and I'm going to tell you the moves right here. So they've gendered the division of labor and risk. You don't really know if you're black how distorted it is until you actually read white people talking about white families and actually look at white families, right? So it's pretty much the case that household labor is gendered women and provision and protection is gendered for men. But that's, I mean, for a lot of reasons, that's never been my experience in the black, but it's not meant for black families. It's meant for the white colonial family, because really that labor and that risk then gets licensed to happen to racialized others, right? So I've talked before about the 1918 ordinance in Greenville, South Carolina, that forced black women to work as maids for white women because black men were all fighting in World War I, and so they'd get their government pension, and black women, their wives, quit their jobs working for Miss Ann because they didn't want to be Miss Ann's housekeeper anymore for pennies when their husband was bringing home a pension. And so they went home and looked after their own house. And it got so bad that Greenville, South Carolina, and other places, I think Dallas, instituted laws to force black women to work. You can just you can Google Negro women to be put to work. I've done a video on it, and it's probably on the channel. Go ahead and find it. So the idea was, what these gender identities did was license the racial exploitation of black women so that white families could have the family that they want. Right? So we gender this this division of labor in the white family in order to license exploitation. And the same with gendering the provision and protection of the family. And make no mistake, when white families talk about men protecting the family, they're not just talking about killing spiders, they're also talking about policing Negroes, right? And when you're in charge of provision, that means now as a gender identity, you've been licensed and legitimized to go extract whatever you can from whatever vulnerable population you can for the family. That's why this gender division of labor is actually a colonial artifact. And you see this when you read colonial literature on the family, this gender division of labor and risk. Risk is done for the men, and kind of household drudgeries for the women ends up being shunted off, ends up being a legitimizing mechanism for it to be done by racialized or subordinate others, right? Which is why the gender identities of out groups are not the same as the gender identities of dominant groups, right? And so instead of having, the nuclear family as it's set up, there's too much work, too much risk. Too much work, too much risk. So you can either be rich and pay for other people to do the work and eat the risk, or you can be nasty and be exploited or exploitative and either be an exploited housewife or an exploitative housewife, and white women are both, insofar as seeking to get all this work done, a functionally infinite amount of work done for, under a budget. Or you could be exploited as a worker trying to provide for your family, and, make no mistake, corporations know this and have no problem exploiting you and telling you, for the family, you got to work 60 hours a week. And so you could be an exploited worker, or now you've licensed in your role as providing for the family. If you're a family first guy, all of your exploitative business practices are now licensed. Well, I got to do it to find. I got to eat. Got to feed the family. That's why I have to treat all of these people like trash. That's why I have to have this business model. Got to eat. Got to feed the family. Right. So if we had other ways of eating and feeding the family, it would take rid of the legitimacy of both the way we've gendered exploitation in order to sustain the family, right? So right now, this strife is, as it stands in our contemporary discourse, this strife is just kind of it's taken as just a gender problem. Well, we need to equally divide the risk and labor that goes into a family, but you're equally dividing an infinite amount of risk and labor, or like too much, right? So it doesn't matter if you divide 70% on one side and 70% on the other side. The problem is, like, you still have 100%, 140% of stuff. Instead of 50 and 50, it's 70 and 70, but it's still like it's a distorted distribution. I was thinking about it this morning, and I was kind of likening it to sharecrops. We've sharecroppers. Sharecroppers, like the famous situation is that the person who owned the land would give the sharecropper, a number for the number of pounds of crop they had to cotton or whatever they had to deliver in order to pay off the various loans that the farmer would give. But for some reason, the sharecropper would never actually get enough money to pay off the loans, right? So every season, the sharecropper would bring the cotton to the owner, they'd weigh it, and somehow the sharecropper would always end up short, would you believe? But it was always a hustle, right? It was structurally organized for the sharecropper to never get into the black. And that's kind of the nuclear family as it stands without the state support. It's a hustle that's not structured for your survival. It's structured for oppression, and it's pointedly structured for the oppression of racialized others. But now it's a complicated oppression. So we need the French model, right? We need the French model where they actually left family values means like the state subsidizing some of the labor and some of the risk that goes in provision and protection of the family, right? So instead of having a war between men and women over provision, protection, and the distribution of labor and childcare, we need to understand that it's just too much for everyone, and we need to secure provision by just having a federal job guarantee. So that means you don't have to do awful things for the sake of like supporting your family. You just do. You get it. Like no matter what, everyone gets a unionized job. You still got to work, but it's not going to be under exploitative circumstances with the lever of your family being like waged against you. So, like you're guaranteed a job, $25 an hour. I think everyone in America should, if everyone who wants to work should be offered a job at $25 an hour. You don't work, you don't get paid, but if you do work, you get paid. It's not more complicated than that. We created, was it $3.4 million? I want to say I have the book right here. Created 4 million jobs in fewer than 3 months for the New Deal. And this is when I'm reading a book on federal job guarantee. People must live by work, the direct job programs. And so in the New Deal, they created 4 million jobs in 3 months. And they did that when they only had for information technology, rotary paper, and not rotary, teletype. They had teletype, rotary phones and carbon copies. Rotary phones and carbon copies. You remember the rotary phone? And carbon copies, right? They created 4 million jobs. So we could create jobs. There's stuff to be done. There's fiber to be laid. And, the South has deferred maintenance for 60 years. So we could put every person to work for $25 an hour just like refitting pipes and fixing sidewalks in the South. Not to mention deferred home maintenance from just old people who can't get up on their roof anymore. So you guarantee these are the kinds of policies that would actually support the nuclear family that are just more than just a gender war between people in the family. And since you understand the family has this immediate connection, doesn't have to be gendered. It works for same-sex families. It works for anyone who wants this immediate intimate control over the household where the other person isn't other than you are. That works. The system works. Right. So hope this has been illuminative. Yeah. So we need policies that support the family, that support freedom in the family, that support the family as an emancipated kind of sphere of private activity. And those policies will get rid of the gender division of labor and the gender division of risk. Because we talk a lot about the gender division of labor, we talk less about the gender division of risk. But when I talk to my students, I always ask them, so who asked whom to prom? And then all the guys will raise their hand, and I was like, well, who did not get asked to prom? And the women were, or who was asked, and the women will raise their hand. And I'm saying, like, you think the division of risk just stops there? And it's deep, right? So, and it's also, it's a matter of justice. And it's not just military who gets drafted and who doesn't. It's a justice issue, right? So we need to, but we don't do it by just giving everyone too much work and too much risk. We do it by subsidizing the work and subsidizing the risk, to kind of emancipate the family from being determined by these external factors. All right, so real quickly, since a lot of family people are watching this, I'll tell you what you look for in a spouse. If nobody's told you, people say money, people look for family stability. No, what you look for is a creative problem solver. You need someone who's going to problem solve, especially if you're black, because for richer, for poor, for better, for worse, in sickness and health, that stuff matters, right? Like, because I told my wife, like I could lose a job. And by the way, if you do want me to keep supporting my family and with lessons and all that stuff, kids play music, it's expensive. Go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month, because you're not going to get the quality of wisdom that I dispense every week, sometimes twice a week, for in your school, but it might actually stop you from squandering your life. Man, I know so many old white people who just screwed up all of their kids, and not because they didn't lack money, but because they lacked culture. So they just gave bad advice, and then they ended up like, I don't know, bad. So, or like, why is my daughter such a wastrel? Why is my son such a wastrel? Well, because you lacked culture. So money's not enough, although money helps, right? So the last thing the government could do is something like the CTC, right? Just give families $900 a month per kid. Like, just do it. If you do that, there's a consumer index that the ag department put together, and Winfield did some numbers. It's on, you'll find it page 95 of this book, Democracy Unchained by Richard G. Winfield. By the way, this is a great book if you want like a general like blueprint for what the left should look like. Richard D. Winfield's Democracy Unchained. Page 95, he does the numbers and says, like, look, middle-class families pretty much spend $900 a month on their kids, per kid. So if we want to actually divorce wealth from family planning, we just give people $900 per month per kid. You could taper it down after 3 kids if you're really feeling really cheap. But for the most part, the world is just a better place. Not only do you get rid of childhood poverty, like kids get enrichment activities. And that's where and like transportation to enrichment activities and infrastructure for enrichment activities and league fees for enrichment activities. They still need you to play with them in the backyard. You'll know a suspicious number of these Olympic athletes. Maybe I'll do an Olympic show. Maybe that's what I'll see tomorrow, because I have a different show planned for Friday. But maybe tomorrow I'll do an Olympic show about like how these Olympic athletes there are a lot of fathers involved, and no small number of mothers, but there are a lot of fathers involved in these Olympic athletes. And we're talking about generational athletes. Signe McLaughlin. Her dad was the hurdler. Her dad was in the Olympic trials for hurdles. Her mom was a runner, like a very good one, right? So, we're watching a lot of generational athletes, often a lot of fathers, I'll tell you, so it's not enough just to have coaches and the league infrastructure. You also need a father out there playing ball with you. So, there's a Richard Williams movie coming out. I don't like the title. It's called King Richards, and I think it should just be called Daddy, or Daddy Richard, because I think Richard Williams was a fantastic father and will go down as a fantastic father and should go down as a fantastic father, at least to those 2 girls whom he adored and whom he made tennis champions. So I'll stand for black fatherhood. I am black father, and yeah. You're darn right I push my kids. All right. Thank you very much, and I will see you next. I'll see you this Friday, actually, talking about something else. Oh, well, okay. So before I go, I want to bring the last point home. Right now, a lot of the gender talk is because we don't understand the family as a unit. We don't understand a family as a unit and a sphere of justice. So we're thinking about like, well, how do we uphold women? How do we support women? How do we support men? And not thinking about how do we support families as a unit of justice. We need policies geared towards supporting families as a unit of justice, not necessarily heterosexual families, but families as a sphere of right. This immediate unity, which is a kind of freedom, needs to be supported if we have a constitution that supports freedom. So unless your politic also supports families, it's bad. And watch out, if your gender politics supports women or supports men but doesn't support families, your gender politics might be anti-family, and your gender politics might be actually especially dangerous to people like who don't have the material support like in our degraded politics to sustain their family, right? So like, you know, a lot of the no-fault divorce rhetoric that was like pro-woman ended up being functionally anti-black family. So that's one reason why I do this, because, you know, Oprah got a lot of black women divorced trying to follow their bliss and thinking, well, you know, I need to support myself because this guy's not supporting me, when actually the economics of black reality were not conducive to you know, white aspirations of men being the, you know, in charge of provision and protecting, right? Like, it's always going to be a team game. And it always should be a team game because, like, honestly, it's, like I said, it's the labor aspect is a degradation of women, but the risk and the responsibility aspect is like too much of a burden on men. It's an oppressive dynamic that gets men. This is why black guys there are many reasons why mass incarceration is a thing. One reason is like black guys trying to earn money. There's many reasons why divorce is a thing in the black community. One reason is black guys trying to earn money to live up to like a gender ideal or a family ideal that kind of generates a gender ideal that was never appropriately worked out. So you secure the family and then see what kind of gender degradations like are left. I think they're going to be markedly different than the ones that they are as they stand. But you have to understand the family as a unit of justice, and not just men and not just women, but the family as a unit that calls for state-sponsored support. And, you know, don't listen to white people about this because they got a lot of family money that does a lot of work for them and they don't talk anything about it. They got a lot of extended family money that just kind of appears, whereas black families are trying to put it together and blaming themselves. So what we need is a state-sponsored program that supports all families, as if they're white families that come from old money. Kind of. All right. Take care.